Abandoned and Deceived sounded really great, and even though I watched it for Laurie Loughlin, I definitely would have watched this anyway had I become aware of it randomly. That being said, having now watched it, I can say that it's really kind of disappointing as a story. There are aspects that I can praise, and indeed I will do, but it really didn't deliver what I hoped it would. This was released in 1995. It's directed and written by Joseph Dougherty, with a cast including, of course, Laurie Loughlin, Brian Kerwin, Farrah Forke, Eric Lloyd, and various others. And it's about a woman called Gerri, whose ex-husband wouldn't pay the necessary child support, so she has to find it. And we are told at the beginning of the film that it's fictional, but inspired by a true story. And that in itself made it sound like it was going to be this really gripping, compelling story. I love films based on true stories. I think they're a really good way to tell people's tales and to immortalise their stories when really interesting, moving, emotional, fascinating things happen to them. And nothing in this film is really interesting, moving, emotional, or fascinating. It's really, really bland. I think it's an important topic, and it's not that it couldn't work for a film. It absolutely could. But that's not really the case here. The narrative is so slow. I liked Gerri as a protagonist, but the specifics of the story from one scene to the next were really, really dull. I cared for the character, but I didn't really feel emotionally invested in the narrative or in her story. It is an important topic. I don't think the story is well executed. I can't comment on how close it is to the true story. As I said, we are told it is fictional, but inspired by, so I assume it's very loosely based. But that in itself is quite interesting, because this is a really boring story, at least the way it's told. So if it's inspired by, that means they had the chance to make it more gripping, more exciting. They had creative license. They could change things to make it more compelling. And either they think they did, but it didn't deliver, at least in my opinion, or they just didn't really try to make it more emotional or moving or impactful. Either way, it is very mundane and not a good story. Visually, it's great. Decent camera work and good lighting, good locations. It's an easy watch, which in itself is part of the problem, because I feel like this kind of narrative should be packed with emotion, and it should be not necessarily very heavy, but it should make me feel something. And unfortunately, other than boredom, I felt nothing. Good performances, believable characters, visually very satisfying, but it's not a decent story. It could have been. And I feel like it has a lot to offer in terms of the topic. It is really important, but because it's not engaging, any important messages are likely to be lost. Because if you're not really that bothered about what's happening, you're not really going to be receptive to what you're being told or what the story is trying to share. So it could have worked. It didn't. But by all means, if the topic interests you, or indeed if you're a fan of any of the cast, give it a go. You might like it more than I did, but I thought Abandoned and Deceived was not a very good experience.